Welcome back, everyone, to a brand new explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating intersection. We're looking at human biology, workplace burnout, and macroeconomics. Basically, we're going to unpack exactly why really smart, incredibly hardworking people end up trapped in this vicious cycle of financial self-sabotage. And, even crazier, how those exact same biological impulses are literally reshaping global financial markets as we speak. So, let's get right into it.
Let's be honest for a second. Have you ever had just a truly soul-crushing week at work? You know, the kind where you're staring at spreadsheets for 10 hours a day, or maybe dealing with a nightmare boss. And then, suddenly it's Friday night, you're endlessly scrolling online, and boom, you end up buying a luxury watch, a designer bag, or some crazy gadget you absolutely do not need. If you've ever clicked buy while thinking to yourself, man, I've worked so hard, I deserve this. Well, you're actually experiencing a deeply profound biological reaction.
Okay, let's dive into this. This is what's known as the I deserve it tax. It's essentially a massive financial penalty levied against your net worth, and it's paid by you just to cope with workplace burnout. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that this tax is a biological demand for relief. It is not a sign of poor financial literacy or bad discipline. Our absolute worst financial decisions usually happen when our own biology tricks us into sabotaging our future.
All right, Section 1, the I deserve it tax. $300,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. Imagine your burnout convinces you that you totally deserve a new luxury car. Say it comes with a $900 monthly payment. Now, over 5 years, that costs you about $54,000 in payments alone. But what if you took that same $900 a month and invested it into a diversified index fund? If we assume an average 8% return and let it sit for another 20 years, that money balloons to over $300,000. So to put that into perspective, that luxury car payment literally represents a $300,000 crater in your future retirement.
Moving right along to Section 2, your brain on burnout.
So what's actually happening inside our heads? Well, we essentially have a tale of two brains. The famous economist Adam Smith actually wrote about this two selves concept centuries ago. On one side, we have the patient planner. This guy lives in your prefrontal cortex. It's your wealth-building center, responsible for executive function and impulse control. On the flip side, we have the impatient doer, which is driven by your amygdala, the limbic system, and all it wants is immediate relief. When you're chronically stressed, your body just floods with cortisol, and that actually shrinks the connections in your prefrontal cortex. Suddenly, the primitive survival brain takes the steering wheel. And let me tell you, it does not care about a 6-year auto loan. It just wants the bad feelings to stop, right now.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it leads to something called hyperbolic discounting. Early economists used to call this a defective telescopic faculty. Think of it like this. A healthy, rested brain can look 20 years down the road and clearly see the value of a solid retirement fund. But a burnout brain? It shrinks that time horizon all the way down to about 48 hours. It excessively discounts future outcomes just to get that immediate neurochemical relief. And honestly, this is exactly why brilliant, highly educated professionals will drop $5,000 on a random Tuesday night. They're literally operating with a defective telescope.
Which brings us to Section 3, the dopamine illusion.
You know, most people think dopamine is the chemical of joy, but actually scratch that. It's the chemical of motivation and anticipation. When you're stressed out, your baseline dopamine is really low. But the exact moment you start browsing online and finally click buy, boom, you get this massive, incredible dopamine peak. But here's the catch. Once you actually own the item, the dopamine crashes, and it often drops even lower than your original stressed out baseline. So what's happening is we become chemically addicted to the mere act of buying. We're using frictionless consumerism as a temporary fix to self-medicate our burnout, which is exactly why those packages end up just gathering dust in the corner.
And this chemical crash leads us straight on to the hedonic treadmill. No matter what we buy, we almost immediately snap back to our baseline level of happiness. Sure, that $60,000 car feels amazing at first, but after 3 months, it just feels normal. But guess what doesn't go away? That $900 monthly payment. So to get that same dopamine thrill the next time you're stressed, you have to buy something even bigger. Finance professionals call this trap golden handcuffs. You keep increasing your living costs just to cope with the stress of your job, which in turn legally and financially binds you to stay trapped in that exact same toxic job just to pay the bills. You earn more, you spend more to cope, and suddenly your freedom just totally vanishes.
Let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, a world of impatience. Let's look at how this builds on a macro level. Warren Buffett famously said, "I often make more money when I am snoozing than when I am active." That quote brilliantly captures the prefrontal cortex at work. Patience is actually a uniquely human evolutionary trait.
And honestly, it's the ultimate historic driver of all economic growth. But here's the wild part. Our modern financial system is actively working against our evolution.
Just consider the average holding period for U.S. stocks. Back in 1940, the average investor would hold on to a stock for about 7 years. By 1987, that timeline had dropped to under 2 years, and by 2007, just 7 months. Today, we have high-frequency trading operating in literal milliseconds. Our global financial markets have effectively become a mirror reflecting our stressed-out short-term brains. The whole system is prioritizing instant gratification over long-term fundamentals.
And this brings us to a really fascinating concept, Gresham's law of finance. Historically, Gresham's law states that bad money drives out good. But in modern finance, this translates into a highly self-destructive cycle where impatient, short-term momentum traders actually end up driving out the patient, far-sighted investors. Now, you'd think having more information and tons of market liquidity would be a great thing, right? But ironically, too much liquidity actually unlocks our impatience gene. It allows the impatient doer in our brains to just instantly lock in a gain or a loss, which creates excess volatility and ultimately bankrupts the patient planner. The entire global market is basically out there shopping on cortisol, just like we do on a late Friday night.
All right, Section 5, Escaping the Trap.
Okay, so how do we fix this? Well, because you literally cannot out-willpower biological exhaustion, you absolutely have to build systemic guardrails. You need an exact escape plan. Step 1 is the 48-hour rule. Force yourself to wait 2 full days for any non-essential purchase. Just give that biological dopamine storm time to pass. Step 2, reframe the reward. You need to actively train your brain to get its dopamine hit from acquiring actual assets, like index funds, instead of depreciating liabilities. And step 3, automate. Set up your investments to trigger automatically the exact same day you get your paycheck, so the money gets moved before your depleted brain even has a chance to touch it.
So, the crucial point here is this. True self-care is buying your future freedom. It is not buying a depreciating liability. The marketing industry has done an incredible job of weaponizing our mental health, trying to frame luxury items as self-love. But real self-care, that's having a fully funded emergency fund that lets you say no to a toxic boss. It's owning the assets that actually allow you to reclaim your time and your life.
Which leaves us with one final provocative question to think about. Are you going to keep paying the I deserve it tax to massive corporations, or are you finally going to start paying yourself? Remember, you are the architect of your own future. So the next time you have a terrible, soul-crushing week at work, remember the neuroscience behind it. Protect your prefrontal cortex, harness your patience, and buy back your autonomy. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.